There are moments in sports that become more than a fight, more than a game, more than a championship. Moments when the world stops and watches. On October 30th, 1974, in the heart of Africa, under the humid midnight sky of Zaire, the world witnessed such a moment. They called it Rumble in the Jungle, a battle between two men who could not have been more different. On one side stood George Foreman, the undefeated, unstoppable heavyweight champion, a man who didn't just win fights, he destroyed opponents, 24 knockouts in his first 25 fights. He hit with the weight of a falling tree, he walked like a tank, punched like a thunderbolt, and carried an aura of fear so intense that many fighters lost to him long before the first bell rang. To the world, he wasn't just a champion, he was the most dangerous man alive. And opposite him stood a man many thought was finished, a man they called too old, too slow, too fragile, a man who had been exiled from boxing, stripped of his title, humiliated, criticized, doubted, and worn down by years of struggle. That man was Muhammad Ali. Once the greatest fighter on earth, now a fading star. A legend many believed had no chance against the terrifying force that was George Foreman. The odds makers said Ali couldn't survive 5 rounds. Experts predicted a brutal knockout. Some feared Ali might be seriously hurt. They said Foreman was too strong, too powerful, too young. And Ali? They said his time was over, but they didn't understand him. They didn't understand the fire that still burned inside him. They didn't understand what Africa meant to him, or what this fight meant to the millions of people who saw him not just as a boxer, but as a symbol of defiance, dignity, and pride. Zaire didn't just welcome Ali, it embraced him like a returning king. Crowds surrounded his training camp. Children shouted, "Ali, Bomaye! Ali, kill him!" The world had never seen anything like it. This was no ordinary fight. It was a clash of styles, a clash of eras, and a clash of spirits. Foreman fought with brute strength. Ali fought with something far more unpredictable, far more dangerous. His mind. He carried not only skill, but strategy. Not only courage, but audacity. Not only fists, but a heart that refused to break. What happened on that humid night in Kinshasa would become one of the greatest upsets in sports history, a masterpiece of intelligence, endurance, psychology, and heart. But what led to that unforgettable night? How did Muhammad Ali, a man nearly everyone believed was finished, find the strength to stand against the most terrifying champion of his era? How did George Foreman, a man who had never tasted defeat, step into the ring unprepared for the storm that awaited him? And how did this single fight, set deep in the heart of Africa, change not only the world of boxing, but the world's understanding of courage, identity, and greatness itself? Tonight, we revisit one of the most iconic moments in human athletic history. A story of fear, faith, strategy, and an unbreakable will. This is the untold story behind Rumble in the Jungle. This is how a man the world counted out stood up before millions, defied all expectations, and reclaimed his destiny. This is the night Muhammad Ali shocked the world. Long before the bright lights of Zaire, long before the chants of Ali Bomaye shook the African air, the journey toward the Rumble in the Jungle had already begun. Not inside a boxing ring, but in 2 very different lives, traveling toward one inevitable collision. Muhammad Ali's road to Zaire was not a road of victory. It was a road of punishment, a road carved by politics, sacrifice, and time lost. In 1967, at the height of his powers, Ali refused to serve in the Vietnam War. He was stripped of his heavyweight title, banned from boxing, and pushed into a wilderness where he could not fight, could not earn, could not prove himself the champion he still believed he was. 3 years gone. 3 prime years. Years a fighter never gets back. When he finally returned in 1970, he was not the same man physically. He was heavier, slower. His once inhuman reflexes had dulled. His legs, which once danced like no heavyweight had ever danced, no longer moved with the same magic. But mentally, spiritually, emotionally, Ali was sharper than ever. He wanted his title back. He wanted revenge on time. He wanted the world to remember who he was. His journey back began with Jerry Quarry, then Oscar Bonavena. 2 victories, important, but not enough. Then came the legendary fight of the century against Joe Frazier in 1971. A brutal, unforgiving battle. Ali lost. The world whispered, "He's finished." Ali didn't agree. He continued fighting. He beat Quarry again. He outsmarted Buster Manis. He survived the powerful Mac Foster. He boxed brilliantly against Floyd Patterson, but he still needed something more, something to prove he was ready to challenge the new king of the heavyweight world. He needed redemption. And that came in 1973 when Ali fought a young, powerful crusher named Ken Norton. And Norton broke Ali's jaw. It was supposed to be the end. Instead, it was a beginning. Ali fought Norton again and won. Then fought Frazier a second time and won that too. The world no longer whispered. They wondered, is Ali back? Could he possibly challenge the most terrifying heavyweight alive? Ali believed the answer was yes. He wanted George Foreman. Badly. But to understand why that was such an outrageous dream, we must understand the monster standing on the other side of the road. While Ali fought to reclaim his past, George Foreman was rewriting the future. Foreman was not like other fighters. He didn't jab and dance. He didn't rely on finesse or rhythm. He relied on raw nuclear power, the kind of power rarely seen in boxing history. Foreman was a storm in human form. From the moment he turned professional after winning Olympic gold in 1968, he tore through opponents like paper. Knockouts became routine. Opponents fell in 1 round, sometimes 2, almost never more. Then came January 1973, Kingston, Jamaica, a fight that changed everything. Joe Frazier, undefeated, relentless, the man who had beaten Ali, stepped into the ring as the reigning heavyweight champion. Foreman destroyed him. 6 knockdowns in 2 rounds, 2 rounds. Frazier, the unstoppable pressure machine, had been dismantled like a toy. The world watched in shock. George Foreman was not just a champion. He was a force of nature, a man you survived, not defeated. Foreman then crushed Ken Norton, the same man who gave Ali hell, in only 2 rounds. The message was clear. George Foreman was invincible. 2 lives, 2 destinies, moving steadily toward each other. Ali, the fallen king, the poet warrior, the man who refused to be erased. Foreman, the unstoppable juggernaut, the unbeatable destroyer, the new ruler of the boxing world. One needed redemption. The other needed validation. One wanted to prove he still belonged. The other wanted to prove he could never be dethroned. Their worlds collided when Zaire, under President Mobutu Sese Seko, offered a $10 million purse for a heavyweight championship fight. It was unheard of, unimaginable, a sum so enormous that both fighters accepted instantly. More importantly, the fight would be held in Africa. A symbolic homecoming for Ali and a new chapter for Foreman. When the contracts were signed, the world gasped. Ali versus Foreman, the legend versus the monster, the dancer versus the destroyer. The press laughed at Ali's chances. Foreman was a heavy favorite. Nobody believed Ali could survive, let alone win. But Ali didn't need belief. He needed opportunity. And the moment the plane to Zaire lifted off the ground, the world began preparing to witness one of the most iconic battles in the history of sport. A battle that would reshape boxing forever. A battle that would prove that destiny does not belong only to the strong, but to the determined. When Muhammad Ali's plane touched down on the runway of Njili Airport in Kinshasa, Zaire, it wasn't just an athlete arriving for a boxing match. It was the arrival of a global symbol stepping onto the soil of a continent that carried centuries of struggle, pride, and longing. The roar that rose from the crowd waiting outside was unlike anything Ali had ever heard, not even in the deafening arenas of America. This was not applause. This was a welcome, a proclamation, a celebration of a man many Africans saw as a living embodiment of resistance and dignity. Ali stepped out of the plane, greeted not by officials first, but by the sound of thousands chanting in unison, Ali Bomai! Ali Bomai! Translated, Ali, kill him! The words were not born from violence, but from the desire to see their hero defeat the larger-than-life George Foreman, the man many believed was unbeatable. For Ali, it was a moment that hit deeper than any punch he had ever taken. He paused, looked around, then smiled, wide, bright, warm, as if the soul of the continent had wrapped its arms around him. He raised his fists in the air, not as a threat, but as gratitude. The Zairean government, under President Mobutu Sese Seko, had orchestrated a grand arrival. Banners hung from the streets, painted with Ali's face. Drums echoed from distant villages, merging with the cheers of city dwellers who had come from miles just to see the man whose courage had crossed the ocean long before he did. The humid African air wrapped around Ali immediately. It was thick, dense, and almost suffocating to someone who had been training in controlled environments. Sweat formed instantly on his skin, yet he didn't wipe it off. He wanted to feel everything: the heat, the pressure, the spirit of the people. Meanwhile, George Foreman's arrival couldn't have been more different. He landed quietly, without the same ocean of adoration. The people respected his power, yes, but they loved Ali. They connected with Ali. Foreman was seen not as the villain, but as the outsider, the cold, brutal destroyer who represented domination, not liberation. Ali felt the difference in the air immediately. Foreman was a champion, a titan in the ring, but he did not command the hearts of the people. Ali did. From the airport to the streets of Kinshasa, the people followed Ali's motorcade like a river of humanity. Children ran barefoot beside the cars. Women waved brightly colored cloths and shouted blessings. Men beat on drums and chanted his name in rhythms that echoed through the dust-filled air. Ali leaned out the window, shaking hands, laughing, talking, and shouting back to the crowds as if he were a politician campaigning for love, and the people gave it freely. That night, Ali stood on the balcony of his hotel, looking out at the city. Torches flickered in the distance. The chanting still echoed from every direction. Ali Bomai! He closed his eyes. He knew what this meant. This wasn't just a fight. This wasn't just about reclaiming a world title. This was history, unfolding with every heartbeat. Ali had stepped into Zaire not simply as Muhammad Ali the fighter, but as Muhammad Ali the symbol, a connection between African Americans and Africa itself, between past and present, between the oppressed and the hopeful. And as he breathed the heavy night air, he told himself one thing: he could not lose. Not here. Not now. Not with millions of voices lifting him up. Tomorrow he would train. Tomorrow he would plan. Tomorrow he would prepare for the biggest challenge of his life. But tonight he let the chance carry him. Ali Bomai. It sounded like destiny calling his name. Before Muhammad Ali even laced up his gloves for the first training session in Zaire, an undeniable truth hung over the upcoming fight like a dark, heavy cloud. George Foreman was terrifying. Not intimidating, not dangerous, terrifying. To understand the magnitude of the challenge Ali faced, one had to understand the monster that George Foreman had become in the boxing world by 1974. Foreman wasn't just the heavyweight champion. He was the embodiment of raw, unrestrained power. A man who didn't win fights so much as he ended them. Quickly, violently, without mercy. His punches were not simply blows. They were sledgehammers swung by a man who looked carved from iron and rage. Boxing analysts spoke of Foreman with a kind of reverence usually reserved for mythical beasts. He had demolished Joe Frazier, the man who had defeated Ali, knocking him down 6 times in just 2 rounds. It wasn't a fight. It was a public disassembly of a champion. Then Foreman obliterated Ken Norton in much the same fashion. Norton, the man who broke Ali's jaw, who pushed him to the edge of defeat, was folded and flattened by Foreman's power, melting under punches that seemed to defy the limits of human force. In a world that loved Muhammad Ali, respected him, and admired everything he stood for, an uncomfortable truth settled in. Most people believed Ali would not survive George Foreman, not lose, not get knocked out, not survive. Sports writers whispered it. Trainers admitted it behind closed doors. Doctors worried. Fans prayed. Even people who despised Ali publicly found themselves uneasy at the thought of him stepping into the ring with the hardest hitter the heavyweight division had ever seen. The world had never seen power like Foreman's. Every punch he threw seemed to shake the canvas. Every opponent he faced looked small standing next to him. And towering above all of that was his aura, the aura of inevitability. If Muhammad Ali was poetry, grace, and movement, George Foreman was inevitability, a human avalanche, a silent, brooding destroyer. And yet, despite his power, despite his record, despite the fear he radiated, Foreman rarely spoke. He didn't charm crowds, he didn't dance, joke, or talk his way into headlines. He didn't have to. His fists did the talking. His silence added to the dread. People feared a man who didn't have to shout to assert his dominance, a man whose calmness was more frightening than any threat Ali could throw. Ali knew all of this. He knew it better than anyone. Every time he stepped in front of a crowd in Zaire, he saw the hope in their eyes, but he also felt the weight of their expectation. Could he withstand the storm? Could he survive the man who destroyed champions as if they were made of thin glass? And while Ali thrived on attention, Foreman seemed to shrink into himself, uncomfortable with the hero worship Ali was receiving. The people loved Ali, yes, but they respected Foreman, even feared him. In a country still shaped by the aftershocks of colonialism, Foreman's cold presence reminded many of authority, of control, of brute force. Ali was freedom. Foreman was threat. As Foreman began his early training sessions in Zaire, journalists watched in stunned silence as he pounded the heavy bag, each punch echoing across the gym like thunder. The bag didn't swing. It convulsed. Some claimed they could feel the vibrations in their ribcage from 20 feet away. Meanwhile, Ali's team, aware of the danger, carried an undercurrent of anxiety beneath their public confidence. They believed in Ali, but they also knew that one mistake, one miscalculation, one punch might end everything. Behind the scenes, quiet conversations filled the late nights. What if Foreman hits him clean? What if Ali can't dance long enough? What if his body can't take the punishment anymore? Everyone asked the same question. No one dared answer. Because the truth was unsettling. This fight might not just determine the champion, it could end Ali's life. And somewhere deep within himself, Ali knew the risk. But he also knew something else. George Foreman might be the most powerful man in the world. But power alone had never beaten Muhammad Ali. Ali had faced the U.S. government, media backlash, social exile, and the crushing weight of public hatred, and survived. He had faced fear before, and overcome it. Now, standing under the burning Zairean sun, surrounded by people who believed in him with every fiber of their being, Ali silently promised himself, if Foreman was a storm, he would be the rope that let the storm exhaust itself. But the world didn't know that yet. All it knew was the shadow Foreman cast, and how small even legends seemed inside it. When Muhammad Ali began training in Zaire, something remarkable happened, something no one, not even the greatest boxing minds, could have predicted. The oppressive heat, the thick humidity, the long days, the early mornings, they didn't wear him down. They made him stronger. Ali wasn't just training in Africa. He was becoming part of it. Each morning, before the sun fully climbed over the horizon, Ali would step out of his training camp in Nsele and begin his road work. The air was still cool, the village quiet, the sky still bruised with the dark blue of night. But it never stayed quiet for long. Children would gather, teenagers would run alongside him, elders would stand in their doorways, nodding in respect. And soon, the chant that echoed across the fight buildup, Ali Bomai, would ignite the morning like a flame. Ali Bomai, Ali Bomai, Ali Bomai, Ali kill him, It wasn't a literal call for blood. It was a call for deliverance. For them, Ali wasn't merely a boxer. He was a symbol of resilience, of resistance, of a man who refused to bow to powers larger than himself. He was the hero who wouldn't kneel. And in Africa, where the wounds of colonialism were fresh and deep, that meant something greater than any championship belt. The energy of the people fueled him. Their love carried him. Their belief fortified him. His runs became parades. His workouts became performances. His presence became legacy. Inside the makeshift training ring, Ali transformed the heat, an unbearable burden for most, into a weapon. Sweat drenched his body, pouring down his arms, soaking his trunks. But he smiled through it. He joked. He taunted. He embraced the suffering. "It's good for me," he would say. "Foreman can't handle this, but I can. I was born for this." And while his team worried about his age, about his reflexes, about the power he would soon face, Ali focused on something they couldn't see, something deeper. He wasn't trying to outrun Foreman. He wasn't trying to outpunch him. He was preparing to outthink him. During sparring, he moved with a lightness that contradicted the heavy African heat. His feet still danced, not as fast as they once had, but with an elegance only Ali possessed. His head movement sharpened, his timing refined, every motion, every feint, every breath. He refined it beneath the African sun until it became instinct, not technique. But the real training advantage, the secret weapon, happened outside the gym. It happened in the streets. He spent time with locals, shaking hands, laughing with children, speaking to crowds. He absorbed the culture. He let their rhythm become his rhythm. Their struggle became his own. Their pride became his armor. Ali didn't just train his body. He trained his spirit. Each day he grew more connected to the people. And each day the chant grew louder, stronger, more unified. "Ali! Bomai!" Their voices lifted him. Their belief turned him into something greater than a boxer. Meanwhile, Foreman trained in isolation, far from the noise, the crowds, and the energy of the people. His camp was quiet, sterile, serious, and though undeniably powerful, Foreman felt the heat like a weight pressing on his lungs. He felt the cultural distance. He felt like an outsider. Ali felt like he had come home. Journalists noticed the contrast. Ali was alive, electric, glowing with confidence. Foreman was withdrawn, brooding, uncomfortable. One reporter famously wrote, "Ali isn't training for a fight. He's preparing for a coronation." But beneath Ali's charisma, beneath the smiles and laughter, a razor-sharp strategy was taking shape. He watched tapes of Foreman relentlessly. He studied the angles of his punches. He analyzed his footwork, or lack of it. He memorized the moments Foreman paused after throwing his signature power shots. Ali saw the danger, but he also saw the openings. He saw the path to victory. And it didn't involve dancing. He couldn't dance for 15 rounds anymore. He didn't have the legs of the young champion he once was. He needed a new plan, a bold plan, a plan only Ali would dare to execute. As the days passed, the African sun baked the earth, but Ali only became stronger. As the crowds grew, so did his aura. As the fight drew nearer, even his team, those who feared for him, began to sense that perhaps, just perhaps, Ali was building something dangerous, something brilliant. He wasn't preparing to fight in Africa. He was preparing to win in Africa. And the world had no idea what was coming. While the world focused on physical training, the sweat, the heavy bags, the sparring sessions, Muhammad Ali had already begun fighting a second battle. A psychological war. A war of words, presence, pressure, and perception. Because Ali understood something Foreman didn't. In heavyweight boxing, the fight starts long before the first punch is thrown. Mind games were Ali's territory. This was where he thrived, where he was untouched, unbreakable, untouchable. And in Zaire, he unleashed his psychological brilliance with the precision of a master strategist. He knew Foreman was stronger. He knew Foreman was younger. He knew Foreman was feared. So Ali targeted the one part of Foreman that no one had ever dared challenge: his mind. From the moment their training camps were established, Ali began cutting into Foreman's confidence, not with fists, but with language. George can't fight backing up. He's a mummy, big, slow, stiff. He doesn't know how to box. Just swing, swing, swing. Ali said it to the press. He said it to the crowds. He said it to Foreman's face. He even said it during his runs, with thousands of fans behind him shouting in rhythm, Ali Bomai, Ali Bomai. He taunted Foreman in ways that blended humor and humiliation. Big George hits like a truck, but you can see the truck coming. Hey, George, you scared of the Africans? They know who the champion is. Every word became a needle. Every joke became a psychological incision. Ali understood something ancient and fundamental. If you can make your opponent angry, you can make him predictable. And if you can make him doubt himself, you've already won half the battle. George Foreman had built his dominance on fear and silence. He didn't talk trash. He didn't respond to jabs. He didn't engage in verbal battles. He simply destroyed people. But Ali refused to give him space to remain silent. He forced him into the spotlight, into a media circus Foreman had no desire to join. Reporters followed Ali everywhere. Crowds mobbed him. Children chanted his name like he was a king returning home. Foreman, meanwhile, found himself alone, physically and emotionally. He trained in a quiet compound, separated from the energy of the locals. He appeared stiff in interviews, uncomfortable with the noise, the lights, the attention. His attempt to bring his German Shepherd, an ordinary choice in his mind, was interpreted by locals as a symbol of colonial authority, deepening their distrust. The psychological tide surged further in Ali's favor. Foreman was the world champion. But in Zaire, Ali was the people's champion, and Foreman knew it. In press conferences, Ali performed like an entertainer. He joked, he sang, he danced, he insulted Foreman, and he made the journalists erupt in laughter. Whenever Foreman tried to speak, Ali would cut him off. You scared, George? Tell the truth. How long you think you'll last? 2 rounds? 3? You know you can't beat me. Foreman kept trying to maintain composure, but Ali chipped away at him day by day. Ali wasn't just clowning. He was crafting a narrative the world would begin to believe. Foreman, the destroyer of men. Ali, the unbreakable survivor. Foreman, power. Ali, spirit. Foreman, force. Ali, destiny. Storytelling is powerful. Ali knew this better than anyone. Long before Ali leaned on the ropes in the fight, he introduced the idea subtly, almost invisibly, into the media conversation. I've got something special planned for Big George, he would say. He punches too much. He'll punch himself out. Let him burn that energy. I'll be there at the end. Journalists didn't understand. Foreman didn't understand. The world didn't understand. These were seeds of confusion. Because now, when Foreman heard Ali talk about letting him punch, a new anxiety formed. What does he know that I don't? Ali was building doubt, and doubt is poison to a power puncher. Everywhere Ali went, he appeared confident, laughing, joking, playing with children. He projected an image of invincibility. Even if he felt nervous inside, and privately he admitted he did, he never showed it. Foreman saw a man who didn't fear him, a man who didn't flinch, a man who didn't respect his power, and that was unsettling. Foreman wasn't used to being disrespected. He wasn't used to being challenged mentally. He wasn't used to being the villain. Ali forced him into that role. The psychological shift was complete when a journalist asked Foreman, George, how does it feel that Ali seems more like the home fighter here than you do? Foreman didn't have an answer. Ali did. Ali always did. This is my home, Ali said. My people, my roots. Africa knows who the champion is. The room erupted. Foreman sat quietly, and that silence spoke volumes. By the time fight week arrived, the mental scorecard was clear. Ali was loose. Foreman was tight. Ali was adored. Foreman was avoided. Ali controlled the narrative. Foreman struggled to fit inside it. Ali had turned Africa into his arena, the media into his army, and the public into his psychological weapon. He wasn't just preparing for a boxing match. He was preparing for psychological domination. And as the fight drew nearer, something remarkable happened. For the first time in his career, George Foreman began to look unsure. And in the world of heavyweight boxing, uncertainty is fatal. The night before Muhammad Ali and George Foreman stepped into the ring in Kinshasa, Zaire, the entire country seemed to hold its breath. The air was thick, not just with humidity, but with anticipation, with fear, with hope. Zaire had transformed over the previous weeks. The roads vibrated with chants, the people pulsed with energy, and the world's cameras pointed into the heart of Africa. But on that final night, October 29, 1974, the energy shifted. The noise faded. The drums quieted. The crowds went home. The storm was coming, and everyone felt it. At the Nsele training compound, Ali's team moved in silence. No more jokes. No more bravado. The tension was so thick it felt like a weight pressing on their shoulders. Drew, Bundini Brown, Ali's charismatic hype man, sat in a quiet corner, rubbing a set of prayer beads between his fingers. He had spent weeks shouting, singing, motivating, but tonight, even he was quiet. Angelo Dundee, Ali's loyal trainer, paced the room with a restless energy. He checked Ali's gear again and again, gloves, trunks, robe, as if making sure nothing could go wrong. But his eyes betrayed him. Behind his composure was the fear he had never spoken aloud. What if Foreman is too strong? What if we were wrong to let this fight happen? What if tomorrow we lose Ali forever? Ali sensed the anxiety. He could feel it radiating from his team like heat. And so he did what he always did. He brought the room back to life. He smiled. He joked. He spoke calm, reassuring words. "You all worry too much," he said softly. "I've been here before. I know what I'm doing." But deep inside, even Ali felt the pressure. He was 32 years old, an age many fighters never reach at the top level. His reflexes weren't what they used to be. His legs no longer dance for 15 rounds. And tomorrow, he would face a man who punched harder than anyone in boxing history. But Ali refused to let fear breathe inside him. Instead, he sat on his bed, legs crossed, whispering to himself, "I will do it. I will beat him. I am going to shake up the world again." His self-belief became his shield. Only a few miles away, in a quiet, heavily guarded compound, George Foreman tried to sleep. He couldn't. For the first time in his career, he felt the weight of doubt pressing against his chest. Not fear of Ali, but fear of the unknown. Foreman was used to order, to routine, to dominance, but Zaire had been chaotic, unpredictable, unfamiliar. He felt like a stranger in a place where Ali was treated like a returning king. Foreman lay on his bed, staring at the ceiling. The African night hummed with insects. The humid air felt claustrophobic. He turned over, then again, and again. Sleep did not come. His trainer, Dick Sadler, tried to reassure him earlier in the evening. "You'll knock him out, George, just like the others." But Foreman didn't want reassurances. He wanted silence. He wanted stillness. He wanted to feel like himself again. He tried visualizing the fight, the punch, the knockout, the victory, but instead he kept seeing Ali, smiling, laughing, dancing, surrounded by adoring crowds who chanted his name, Ali, Bomaye, Ali, Bomaye. Foreman felt like the outsider, like the villain in someone else's story. For the first time, the undefeated champion felt unsure. In the villages and cities, people didn't sleep either. They gathered around radios, around fire pits, around bars with flickering televisions. Children sat in their parents' laps. Elders told stories about strength, destiny, and ancestral spirits. They prayed for Ali. They chanted for Ali. They waited for Ali. To them, he was more than a boxer. He was a symbol of black pride, of global unity, of a man who stood against oppression and refused to bow. Tomorrow's fight wasn't just a sporting event. It was history. It was identity. It was spiritual. The moon over Zaire seemed brighter than usual, hanging like a watchful eye over the land, as if aware of the magnitude of what was about to unfold. As the world outside simmered with anticipation, Ali sat alone in his room for a final moment of silence. He closed his eyes. He breathed deeply. He thought of everything that had brought him to this night: the exile, the lost years, the hatred, the criticism, the comeback, the belief of millions, and the knowledge that tomorrow everything could end with either redemption or destruction. He whispered to himself, "I'm ready." Not loud, not boastful, not for the cameras. A simple affirmation, a declaration to himself and to destiny. In another room, George Foreman finally drifted into a restless, shallow sleep, only to wake moments later to the chirping of birds signaling dawn. It was time. The fight was unavoidable now. The storm had arrived. Two men, destined for legend, prepared to walk into the ring. One loved by a nation, one feared by the world, one fueled by spirit, one powered by brute force, one reborn, one undefeated. The world would soon witness a battle not just of fists, but of will, heart, and history itself. The night before, the storm had ended. Now, the storm was ready to break. The first thing Muhammad Ali noticed as he stepped out of the tunnel into the open-air stadium in Kinshasa, Zaire, was the roar. Not noise, not applause, but a roar, primal and vibrating, as if the entire continent exhaled at once. It was 4 a.m. The sky was dark, heavy with humidity, and the stadium lights carved golden halos through the night. Yet 60,000 people were wide awake, on their feet, chanting like a heartbeat shaking the ground itself. Ali Boumai, Ali Boumai. The chant rolled like thunder. It wasn't a slogan, it was a declaration. Ali entered first, unusual for a challenger, but the moment he stepped into the stadium, it no longer felt like he was second. Not here, not tonight. He walked slowly, soaking it all in, his robe shimmering in the African air, his face calm, serene, yet locked with purpose. Every step brought him closer to the ring that would decide everything. He touched the gloves of the children rushing toward the barricades. He nodded to elders bending forward in respect. He raised his fist in the air, and the stadium erupted like a volcano ignited by a single spark. Tonight, he wasn't just Muhammad Ali. He was destiny. Then the atmosphere changed. The lights dimmed slightly. A hush fell over the crowd. George Foreman began walking toward the ring. No chants, no cheers, only wary murmurs, scattered applause, and the heavy silence reserved for something terrifying. Foreman's presence was overwhelming. His muscles glistened under the lights, massive, thick, sculpted like a monument to raw power. His expression was cold, almost emotionless, focused, deadly. He looked like a man who could end the night with one punch. Yet in the eyes of the crowd, Foreman wasn't the champion. He was the threat, the outsider, the storm that needed to be stopped. Foreman climbed the steps into the ring, bounced on his feet, and stared across the canvas at Ali. Ali stared back. Two titans, two worlds, two destinies colliding under an African sky. The referee brought them into the center of the ring. Ali's eyes burned with electricity. Foreman's eyes burned with hunger. The referee gave instructions, but neither man listened. They were studying each other, not as boxers, but as predators. Ali said quietly, "George, you in trouble." Foreman didn't respond. He simply glared. The bell had not yet rung, but the fight, the real fight, had already begun. Round 1. The world holds its breath. Ding! Ali moved first. Light on his feet, far lighter than anyone expected. He glided around Foreman like a dancer testing the stage. The crowd roared. Foreman stalked forward, shoulders rolling, fists twitching with destructive potential. Ali snapped out the first jab of the fight. Pop. Clean. Precise. Right to Foreman's face. Foreman blinked. Not hurt, but surprised. Ali threw another, and another, and another. Pop, pop, pop. The crowd exploded with chants. Ali! 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 Foreman lunged forward, swinging a short left hook that cut through the muggy air like a machete. Ali leaned back, barely, and the glove missed his chin by inches. Foreman came again, a right hand, a left uppercut. Ali backed toward the ropes, firing jabs, tagging Foreman as he advanced. Foreman wasn't used to this. He wasn't used to being touched. He wasn't used to someone daring to test him. Ali smiled. "You can't hit me, George." The taunt infuriated Foreman. He stormed forward, launching heavy artillery. Hooks that thudded like sledgehammers against Ali's arms and elbows. Body shots that made the entire ring shake. But Ali didn't crumble. He held his guard. He leaned back. He danced when he could. The heat was suffocating. Foreman's power was monstrous. Yet Ali stayed calm. The end of round 1 came with the bell echoing through the night. Ali walked back to his corner with spring in his step. Foreman walked back with frustration. The message was clear. Ali wasn't running. Ali wasn't afraid. Ali wasn't broken. He was right there, in front of Foreman, talking, punching back, smiling. The psychological war was bleeding into the physical one. Between rounds, 2 corners, 2 realities. In Ali's corner, Angelo Dundee wiped sweat from Ali's face. "You're looking good, champ. Keep that pace. Keep him working." Ali nodded, breathing steady, focused, but Bundini leaned in closer, whispering, "You gotta stay sharp, champ. Foreman hits like death." Ali didn't blink. "Let him hit. He can't do it all night." Across the ring, Foreman sat breathing heavily, not from exhaustion, but from tension. He had landed bombs, yet Ali wasn't breaking. His trainer tried to calm him. "You got him, champ. Just keep pounding that body." But Foreman's eyes were confused. If Ali wasn't supposed to be standing after those punches, round 2, the lion's den gets hotter. As the bell rang for round 2, Foreman charged forward again, throwing heavy blows like a man trying to chop down a tree. But Ali was no tree. Ali was wind. Ali was water. Ali was rhythm. He jabbed. He tied Foreman up. He whispered in his ear. "You tired already, George?" Foreman growled, trying to break free. He hammered Ali's ribs, his arms, his hips. Anything he could hit. The crowd roared louder. "Ali, Bomay! Ali, Bomay!" Ali smiled between clinches. Foreman scowled. Every jab Ali threw was a message. Every dodge was a statement. Every word Ali spoke was a psychological dagger. Ali wasn't just fighting. He was controlling. Even as Foreman's punches thundered into his guard. Even as Ali leaned back on the ropes, a strategy was forming. A plan the world didn't yet understand. But Ali understood. He was walking into the lion's den, and taming the lion with his mind, his spirit, his refusal to break. By the time round 2 ended, the battle lines were clear. Foreman was the force of nature. Ali was the intelligence of humanity. Foreman was the storm. Ali was the sailor who knew how to ride it. Foreman was the punch. Ali was the story. The fight wasn't decided yet, not even close. But something extraordinary had happened. Ali had survived. Ali had held his ground. Ali had made Foreman miss and made him doubt. And in doing so, Ali had stepped deeper into the lion's den, with no fear, because he knew something the world didn't. He had a plan that would change boxing forever. For the first 2 rounds, the world saw 2 fighters in completely different realities. George Foreman was a force of nature. Wide swings, heavy hooks, punches so loud the microphones at ringside vibrated with every impact. Muhammad Ali, pressed to the ropes, looked almost swallowed by the sheer mass and momentum of the younger champion. To every casual viewer, to every journalist watching from the front row, to millions listening through transistor radios across the planet, it appeared as if Ali was being broken down. But what no one knew, what no one could have known, was that in those moments of apparent vulnerability, a masterpiece of boxing strategy was unfolding. Ali was not being cornered. He was not being bullied. He was inviting Foreman forward, into the trap. This was the birth of one of the greatest tactical inventions in the history of sports, the rope-a-dope. Ali leaned back against the ropes deliberately. The ring in Zaire had been constructed with looser tension than usual, a detail Ali noticed during his early training sessions, a detail he tucked away in his mind quietly. He realized that if the ropes could absorb some of the force, his body could absorb the rest without breaking. Everyone believed Ali would dance, glide, use the ring, and outmaneuver Foreman, but Ali knew better. "You can't dance for 15 rounds in this heat," he told his corner. "You can't outrun a man who's 10 years younger in a place where the air feels like fire. If he danced, he'd be caught, and if he was caught, it would be over." So Ali flipped the script. The thing Foreman least expected, least prepared for, was a stationary target. He trained to cut the ring, he trained to chase, but he never trained to dismantle a man who refused to run. Round after round, Foreman launched sledgehammer blows, hooks to the body, uppercuts that could have ended anyone else's night. His face glistened with sweat. Each breath became heavier, more desperate. The Zaire humidity made every movement cost twice the energy, and Ali knew Foreman was carrying too much muscle for this climate. Every time Foreman hit him, Ali spoke. A whisper, a taunt, a needle jab to the psyche. "Is that all you got, George? Come on, Big George, hit harder. You punch like a baby." Ali wasn't just defending, he was psychologically eroding his opponent. Foreman's punches grew wider, sloppier, more emotional. His arms grew heavy, weighted by both fatigue and frustration. And still, Ali hung on the ropes, letting George burn himself out. The rope-a-dope was working. This was not reckless bravery. Every second was meticulously calculated. Ali blocked with his forearms. He rolled with the shots as they landed. He dipped his chin to avoid the uppercuts. He tightened his core to withstand the body blows. He was conducting a symphony of survival. He was balancing pain with patience. He was enduring hell for the chance to create glory. And the crowd felt the shift. They could sense it. They could hear it. Foreman's punches no longer cracked like thunder. They thudded, heavy but dull, slowing, weakening. Ali opened his eyes wider, peering through his gloves. He saw openings now, small ones, but openings nonetheless. Foreman's guard was dropping. His rhythm had disappeared. His legs were beginning to betray him. Ali could smell the turning tide. To the untrained eye, rope-a-dope looked chaotic, dangerous, even suicidal. But to boxing historians, to trainers, to anyone who truly understands the art, it was the work of a mastermind. Ali wasn't just fighting Foreman's fists. He was fighting Foreman's nature. He knew Foreman wasn't built for patience. He knew Foreman wouldn't slow down by choice. He knew the young champion carried too much power for his own endurance. So Ali weaponized Foreman's strength against him. He made Foreman use it, all of it, too quickly. This was not just strategy. It was psychological warfare. It was human chess at the highest level. It was a tired man betting everything on the belief that exhaustion would make the strongest champion vulnerable. And he was right. Somewhere in the 5th round, Foreman's expression shifted. He landed a heavy left hook, the kind that had knocked out Ken Norton and Joe Frazier. But this time, Ali didn't buckle. He didn't crumble. He didn't even stumble. He looked George right in the eyes and smiled. At that moment, Foreman's confidence cracked. He had hit Ali with everything. He had poured his power, his rage, his dominance into each punch. And Ali was still there, still talking, still thinking, still alive. Foreman realized, perhaps for the first time in his career, that he might be losing. Not on the scorecards, not in the moment, but in destiny. Ali had taken everything the giant could give. Now the giant was slowing, and Ali knew what was coming next. The world was about to witness a shift so dramatic, so impossible, that it would redefine greatness. Because once Foreman tired, once the king of power could no longer swing freely, Ali would rise from the ropes and rewrite history. By the seventh round, the fight no longer looked like the same violent storm that had raged in the early minutes. The explosive energy that had defined George Foreman's legendary power seemed to evaporate into the humid, Zairean night. His punches, once meteors, now moved like stones dragged through mud, and Muhammad Ali, the man who had seemed moments from collapse just a short while earlier, was suddenly standing taller, breathing smoother, watching, calculating, waiting for the exact moment the tide would turn in his favor. The crowd felt the shift before the commentators even named it. The rhythm of the arena changed. Less fear, more possibility. The chant returned, louder than ever. Ali Bomaye! Ali Bomaye! Ali, kill him. And for the first time, Ali stepped off the ropes, not to retreat, but to advance. This was the moment everything changed. Ali's movements were different now, light, sharp, intentional. He popped Foreman with a quick left jab, then another, then a right hand that snapped the champion's head back. It wasn't power that made these punches dangerous. It was precision, accuracy, timing, weapons that weighed nothing but landed like truth. And Foreman felt every one of them. He tried to respond with a heavy hook, but Ali wasn't there anymore. Ali was circling, floating, throwing combinations that sliced through George's guard like lightning across a dark sky. For the first time in the fight, it was Foreman who looked uncertain. Foreman who looked lost. Foreman who looked like the hunted instead of the hunter. In the final seconds of the 8th round, Ali noticed a pattern. Foreman dipped his head slightly after throwing his left, exposing the right side of his jaw. It was small, subtle, but unmistakable, and Ali's mind, sharp, fast, ruthless, locked onto it. He saw the future before it happened. He saw the knockout. He saw the moment that would echo through history. With 20 seconds left, Ali invited Foreman in for one last exchange. Foreman swung wide, a desperate, looping left hook. Ali leaned back, not too far, just enough, and returned fire, a right straight to the face, a left hook, a final right hand, a clean, brutal whip across Foreman's jaw. Foreman's arms dropped. His legs betrayed him. His body twisted in slow motion. He fell, not like a man pushed, but like a man whose strength had finally run out. The canvas shook beneath his weight. As Foreman struggled to stand, the crowd erupted. Reporters leaped to their feet. Commentators shouted over one another. The referee counted. 4, 5, 6. Foreman tried, pushing up from the ropes, but the exhaustion was too deep, too complete. 7. His knees buckled again. 8. He fell back. 9. Foreman's eyes were open, but the fight inside him wasn't. 10. The bell sounded. The arena exploded. And Ali, hands raised, body glowing with victory, smiled the smile of a man who had accomplished the impossible. In that moment, the world redefined what it meant to be a champion. Not the strongest, not the youngest, not the most feared, but the smartest, the bravest, the one willing to risk everything on a strategy no one believed in. Ali had taken the hardest punches of the scariest champion alive. He had endured the storm. And when the storm exhausted itself, Ali rose like the sun over Zaire. He defeated George Foreman not by escaping danger, but by stepping into it, understanding it, and using it to carve his own path to glory. The rumble in the jungle was no longer a fight. It had become legend, a story whispered across the generations, the night when the world's most dangerous man fell, and Muhammad Ali reclaimed the throne of heavyweight boxing with brilliance, bravery, and heart. When George Foreman hit the canvas and the referee reached the count of 10, the world witnessed more than the end of a championship fight. It witnessed a rupture, a sudden tear in the fabric of expectation, power, and narrative. Everything people believed about boxing, about strength, about destiny, shattered in one unforgettable moment. Inside Stade du 20 Mai, chaos erupted. Reporters flooded toward the ring. Cameras flashed like lightning. Security scrambled to form a barrier around Ali, who raised his arms high, drenched in sweat but radiant with triumph. And above it all, Louder than any voice, louder than any bell, louder than any drum, the crowd screamed one word: Ali! 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 For the people of Zaire, this wasn't just a sporting victory, it was symbolic. Ali had come to their land, embraced their culture, treated them with respect, loyalty, and warmth. In return, they adopted him as one of their own, lifting him to mythical status. Ali hadn't only won a boxing match, he had won a continent. He had won the world. Across the ring, George Foreman sat on his stool, breathing heavily, stunned, eyes distant. Moments earlier, he had been the most feared man alive. Now, he struggled to understand how everything slipped away so quickly. For the first time in his career, Foreman didn't have an answer. He didn't have a reason. He didn't have a way to explain what happened. He remained silent during the post-fight interview, his voice soft and unsure, the weight of the loss crushing him from inside. It wasn't just that he'd been beaten. It was that he had been outsmarted, undone by a strategy he never saw coming, an idea that would be studied for decades. To many, the fall of George Foreman that night was as shocking as Ali's rise. When the microphone finally reached Muhammad Ali, he delivered one of the most iconic victory statements in sports history. "I told you I was the greatest. I told you I'm the real champion." But beneath the bravado was something deeper, a tone of vindication, a sense of destiny fulfilled. He wasn't just reclaiming a heavyweight title. He was reclaiming the years lost to political exile. He was reclaiming the respect denied to him. He was reclaiming the legacy that so many tried to destroy. Ali had fought the U.S. government, the media, the athletic commissions, public opinion, and now the most dangerous fighter of the era, and he had beaten them all. Global reaction: shock, awe, and disbelief. Within hours, newspapers across continents scrambled to rewrite stories they had prepared in advance. Most had expected an easy Foreman victory. Some predicted Ali might be hurt permanently. Headlines the next morning read like they were written in disbelief. Ali turns back time in Zaire. David slays Goliath in Rumble in the Jungle. Foreman falls to Ali's genius. Sports analysts studied replays obsessively, frame by frame, trying to understand how Ali had survived those early rounds, how he had somehow found the energy to attack at the exact right moment, how the rope-a-dope, seen as madness hours earlier, was now considered genius. The world didn't just talk about the fight, it obsessed over it. And in living rooms, bars, marketplaces, and gyms around the globe, people argued, celebrated, and debated what they had just witnessed. Because the Rumble in the Jungle wasn't simply a victory, it was a rebirth. What separated Ali from every champion before him was not just skill, it was connection. He spoke to people, he inspired them, he made the powerless feel powerful. When he returned to America, crowds flooded airports just to see him walk by. Young fighters mimicked his footwork. Poets wrote about him. Professors lectured on him. Children idolized him. Countries claimed him as their own. Ali had transcended boxing. He was no longer just an athlete. He was a cultural force, a symbol of courage, a voice for the voiceless. And the Rumble in the Jungle forged that identity in fire. For Foreman, the loss began one of the darkest chapters of his life. He spiraled into depression. He questioned his purpose. He wondered whether he had ever truly been the unstoppable monster the world claimed he was. But deep inside, the seeds of change were planted. The George Foreman who eventually returned years later, smiling, humble, wise, would not have existed without this defeat. The Rumble in the Jungle didn't just shape Ali's legacy, it reshaped Foreman's too. The world witnessed not only the collapse of a giant, but the beginning of a long, powerful redemption arc. Looking back now, the images from that night feel eternal. Ali leaning on the ropes, eyes sharp, waiting. Foreman swinging with all his might, the crowd exploding as Foreman falls. Ali standing triumphantly, arms raised in the night air of Zaire. It is a moment replayed in documentaries, studied by trainers, carried in the memories of fans, and preserved in the very heart of sports history. Because on that night, October 30th, 1974, the world didn't just witness a winner, It witnessed the crowning of a legend. Ali didn't just reclaim the heavyweight championship. He reclaimed the narrative of his life. He reclaimed the meaning of greatness. In the aftermath of the fight, one truth became undeniable. Muhammad Ali didn't just beat George Foreman. He changed boxing forever. In the decades following that electrifying night in Zaire, the Rumble in the Jungle evolved from a championship bout into something far larger, an enduring myth, a cultural milestone, a defining moment in global sports history. What Muhammad Ali achieved in that ring transcended the variables of weight, age, reach, or even skill. It became a story passed down through generations, not merely as a demonstration of athletic brilliance, but as a lesson in strategy, courage, identity, and the unbreakable force of human spirit. The fight's legacy is not measured in rounds, punches, or scorecards. It is measured in inspiration, how its echoes continue to shape boxing, politics, music, film, and even the very idea of what it means to stand for something bigger than yourself. In a world divided by politics, race, power, and conflict, the Rumble in the Jungle became a rare global moment of unity, millions aligned behind one man, watching him defy every odd in front of their eyes. Let's explore the legacy that this fight imprinted upon history. 1. The redefinition of greatness. Before the fight, the boxing world measured greatness primarily through dominance. How brutally a champion could destroy his opponents, how decisively he controlled the ring. Foreman personified this belief. He was the model, big, powerful, devastating. But Ali shattered that definition. He showed that greatness wasn't just about strength. It was about intelligence, patience, adaptability, resilience, and heart. He used a strategy that seemed insane but turned out to be unmatched genius. He defeated power with endurance. He defeated youth with experience. He defeated predictability with imagination. Forever after, greatness in combat sports would include not only physical superiority, but mental mastery. Ali redefined the criteria. 2. The birth of the rope-a-dope as a legendary strategy. Few techniques in sports history are as universally recognized or as misunderstood as the rope-a-dope. Coaches study it, fighters discuss it, fans analyze it endlessly. And yet, no one has ever repeated it with the same success. Why? Because it wasn't merely a tactic. It was a combination of circumstance, psychology, physical conditioning, and Ali's unique charisma and courage. The legacy of the rope-a-dope taught the world, sometimes the path to victory means letting your opponent exhaust themselves. Sometimes the strongest move is to absorb rather than resist. Sometimes retreat is not weakness, it is setup. And sometimes the surest way to defeat a giant is to help the giant destroy himself. The rope-a-dope became part of the global vocabulary, a metaphor used in business, politics, and life. Outlast, endure, strike when the moment is right. 3. Africa's moment on the global stage. The Rumble in the Jungle was more than a sporting event. It was a celebration of African identity and pride at a time when the continent was seeking its voice on the global stage. For Zaire, modern-day Democratic Republic of Congo, the fight brought unprecedented global attention. Streets filled with music and culture. Local chants became world famous. African pride echoed in the voices of hundreds of thousands chanting, "Ali Bomai." This was one of the first major global events hosted in Africa, proving the continent could unite the world around a single moment. Its legacy continues to influence how international events are brought to emerging nations today. 4. A new era in boxing promotion. The Rumble in the Jungle was also a turning point for sports promotion due to one man behind the scenes, Don King. This event marked the beginning of modern boxing marketing. Huge purses, global broadcasts, international hype, cultural tie-ins, celebrity involvement, and cinematic storytelling. Today's megabouts, Las Vegas superfights, Saudi Arabia events, pay-per-view extravaganzas, exist because the Rumble in the Jungle showed how to package boxing as a global spectacle. The blueprint was written in Zaire. Foreman's transformation and redemption. Strangely, one of the most powerful legacies of the fight belongs to George Foreman, not in his defeat, but in who he became afterward. The loss triggered a spiritual and emotional transformation. Foreman stepped away from boxing, becoming a preacher, a humanitarian, and eventually returning to the ring as an older, wiser fighter who inspired millions with his second act. Had Foreman crushed Ali, the world might never have seen the joyful, generous George Foreman of the future, the man who became one of the most beloved ambassadors of the sport. In this sense, the Rumble in the Jungle shaped two legends. 6. Cultural influence: music, film, literature. The fight became a wellspring of creative inspiration. Documentaries like When We Were Kings won Academy Awards. Authors wrote entire books dedicated to the psychological depth of the event. Artists and musicians, from the streets of New York to villages in Africa, drew inspiration from Ali's triumph. Phrases like Rumble in the Jungle and Ali Bomai became cultural symbols. The fight's legacy reached into hip-hop, reggae, cinema, poetry, and theater. It became a piece of global folklore, retold, reimagined, and revered. 7. A symbol of resistance and identity. For millions around the world, especially in black communities, the victory symbolized defiance against oppression. Ali represented courage to speak truth to power, strength in the face of injustice, the possibility of triumph, despite systemic obstacles. Pride in heritage and identity, Ali didn't just fight for a title. He fought for dignity, self-determination, and representation. His victory became a message. You can stand your ground even when the world doubts you. 8. The fight that cemented Ali as the greatest. While Ali had achieved enormous success before Zaire, this victory was the one that solidified his legacy forever. He wasn't supposed to win. He wasn't supposed to survive. He wasn't supposed to rise from exile and reclaim the throne. But he did. The Rumble in the Jungle became the ultimate argument in Ali's favor whenever the debate over the greatest boxer of all time arose. It wasn't just the win. It was how he won. Outsmarting the most feared puncher alive, enduring unimaginable punishment, executing a strategy no one else could, winning with timing, intellect, and heart. Doing it all at age 32 against a 25-year-old knockout machine, it was the perfect underdog story. Except the underdog was the greatest of all time. 9. A legacy that lives in every fighter today. Ask any modern boxer, from champions to rookies, and they know the Rumble in the Jungle. They've studied it. They've debated it. They've tried to understand how Ali pulled it off. The fight left behind lessons still taught in gyms today. How to handle pressure, how to conserve energy, how to adapt mid-fight, how to stay mentally strong, how to use strategy to defeat power. Every fighter, consciously or not, carries a piece of that night with them each time they step into a ring. 10. The eternal symbol of human spirit. Ultimately, the biggest legacy of the Rumble in the Jungle isn't technical, cultural, or historical. It's emotional. It is a story of a man who lost everything, suffered publicly, was told he'd never be champion again, returned against impossible odds, faced a monster, and won by being smarter, braver, and more resilient than anyone imagined. It is a story of heart, of defiance, of brilliance, of faith in oneself. This is why the Rumble in the Jungle will never fade. It is not just history. It is not just sport. It is not just entertainment. It is a timeless reminder that sometimes, when everything is stacked against you, you can still rise, endure, and triumph, just like Muhammad Ali did in the heart of Africa. The roar of the crowd in Zaire faded with time, the stadium lights dimmed, and the dust of the battlefield eventually settled. But the story of the Rumble in the Jungle never stopped echoing. It pulsed through decades, woven into the very soul of boxing, etched into sports history as one of humanity's greatest displays of strategy, resilience, and unbreakable spirit. Muhammad Ali's victory on that historic night wasn't just another win. It was a declaration, a rebirth, a redefinition of what greatness meant. Long after the punches were thrown and the cheers died out, the world continued to sift through the lessons left behind. Ali had toppled the unbeatable. He had outsmarted the unstoppable. He had danced with danger and turned fear into triumph. But beyond the ring, the legacy cut deeper. Children across continents grew up hearing the legend of the man who believed in himself when no one else did. Fighters in gyms, whether in Philadelphia, Manila, Lagos, London, or Jakarta, watched the grainy footage of Ali leaning on the ropes, absorbing punishment like a man carved from iron, waiting for the perfect moment to rise. And when that knockout punch landed, it became more than a blow. It became a symbol of patience, a symbol of strategy, a symbol of the strength of the human will. Even George Foreman, once the terrifying force of nature, came to respect and cherish the memory of that night. The loss humbled him, reshaped him, and played a role in the transformation that would one day make him one of the most beloved figures in sports. Their rivalry turned into friendship, built on something only warriors who shared blood, sweat, and destiny could understand. Zaire, now the Democratic Republic of Congo, never forgot either. The fight had been more than entertainment. It had been a cultural storm, a political symbol, and a moment when the eyes of the world looked toward Africa not with pity, but with awe. People who had been there still told the story with shining eyes, how they chanted Ali Bomaye and felt, even for one night, that they were part of something immortal. And Ali, his legacy stretched beyond victories. He became a global voice for justice, courage, and dignity. His triumph over Foreman strengthened his mythos, but the way he lived afterward strengthened his humanity. For generations of boxers, strategists, dreamers, and underdogs, the rumble in the jungle remained a beacon, a reminder that the body can be beaten, but the spirit can remain undefeated. A reminder that the mind, when sharpened, is a weapon more powerful than fists. A reminder that even when the world counts you out, you can rise, redefine the rules, and carve your own destiny. The fight became eternal, a story told and retold, studied and celebrated, a moment preserved in the amber of human memory, because on that night in 1974, the world didn't just witness a boxing match, it witnessed a miracle of willpower, a masterpiece of strategy, a triumph of soul, a legend that would outlive every fighter, every fan, every generation, a legend named Muhammad Ali. In the years that followed the rumble in the jungle, historians, analysts, and storytellers continued to dissect the event, not just as a boxing match, but as a cultural and geopolitical milestone. It was clear that what happened in Zaire that night rippled far beyond the ropes, reshaping the world's understanding of identity, power, and possibility. To the casual observer, it might have seemed like a simple upset, a former champion reclaiming his title. But to those who looked closer, it was a revolution disguised as a sporting event. In 1974, the world was fractured, burdened by Cold War anxieties, civil rights battles, and the complex dynamics between the global North and South. Yet in the heart of Africa, two men stepped into a ring and created a story that transcended borders, race, and politics. Muhammad Ali, once stripped of his title for refusing military service, stood as a global symbol of resistance and conviction. His fight in Zaire wasn't just a return to glory. It was a statement that principles mattered, that dignity mattered, that no force could silence a man who believed in justice. Ali's victory reminded millions that courage wasn't defined by muscle or dominance, but by the ability to endure, adapt, and rise. George Foreman, on the other hand, represented an entirely different lesson. His defeat served as a universal reminder of vulnerability, the truth that even the strongest can fall, and that loss can be a gateway to transformation. In losing, Foreman began his path toward becoming a gentler, wiser figure who would eventually win back the world's heart. The fight changed him, reshaped him, and pushed him toward a future richer and more meaningful than victory alone could have ever offered. For Africa, the event carried its own profound meaning. Zaire became the epicenter of global attention. The fight brought pride, electricity, and a sense of unity to millions who saw Ali as a brother, a hero, a symbol of African identity. The chants of Ali Bomaye were not just for a boxer, They were cries of empowerment for an entire continent that had long grappled with the legacy of colonialism. Through Ali, Africa saw strength and representation on a world stage. Even the world of marketing, sports entertainment, and media felt the aftershocks. Don King's bold vision of a globally broadcast event in the heart of Africa rewrote the rules of promotion. The fight opened doors to the era of megafights, pay-per-view spectacles, and global sports commercialization. It showed that an event could be more than a competition, it could be a cultural phenomenon. But above all else, it was the fight's symbolism that endured. Ali showed the world that intelligence could conquer brute force. He showed that patience could dismantle aggression. He showed that belief in oneself, even when the world scoffs, can turn the impossible into destiny. The Rumble in the Jungle wasn't just a boxing match. It was proof that myth can be real, that legends can be human, that greatness can come from struggle, not ease. Generations would watch the footage and feel chills. Coaches would replay the rounds to teach young fighters about psychology, discipline, and heart. Thinkers outside the sport, from business leaders to political strategists, would study Ali's rope-a-dope as a metaphor for overcoming overwhelming odds. The world learned that sometimes retreat is not surrender. It is preparation. Sometimes exhaustion is not defeat. It is opportunity. And sometimes the most powerful punch is the one thrown after everyone thinks you're finished. Ali's victory became a guiding light, a metaphor woven into global culture. It didn't just change boxing, it changed how humanity understood strength itself. As the years turned into decades, the Rumble in the Jungle became more than a moment frozen in time. It became one of the foundational pillars of Muhammad Ali's legacy. The fight was replayed in documentaries, studied by scholars, and retold in classrooms and living rooms across the world. It marked the moment when Ali didn't just reclaim his heavyweight crown, he reclaimed his place as a global icon of courage, intelligence, and unbreakable will. For Ali, Zaire was not simply a victory, it was a triumph of identity. After years of persecution, exile from boxing, and public criticism for his refusal to fight in Vietnam, Ali emerged not as a broken man seeking redemption, but as a champion who had molded his suffering into greatness. The Rumble in the Jungle reaffirmed what many already believed. Ali was not merely a boxer. He was a symbol. His victory demonstrated that greatness is not a product of physical dominance, but of inner conviction. It showed that the human spirit, when anchored in purpose, can surpass any obstacle. Ali's rope-a-dope strategy became a metaphor for resilience, the idea that one could absorb the blows of life, endure the pressure, and still rise when the moment demanded it. George Foreman's legacy, too, evolved in remarkable ways. His defeat in Zaire did not bury him. It rebuilt him. Foreman would step away from boxing, rediscover his faith, reinvent himself, and ultimately return to the ring to reclaim the heavyweight title at age 45, becoming the oldest champion in history. In many ways, his journey was also born from that night in Zaire, a night that humbled him, reshaped him, and set the stage for one of the greatest redemption arcs in sports history. The fight also transformed the business of boxing. It became the blueprint for future megafights, events that transcended sports and captivated the entire world. Promoters, broadcasters, and sponsors began to understand the power of global spectacle, and they built an industry around it. Without the Rumble in the Jungle, there would be no modern era of pay-per-view giants or international fight promotions. And then there was Africa. Zaire, despite its troubled political landscape, found itself written into global history as the host of one of the greatest sporting events ever. The chants of Ali Boumai became immortalized in film, music, and memory, a reminder of a rare moment when a continent and an athlete aligned in spirit. Ali's embrace of Africa and Africa's embrace of him forged a bond that outlasted the event itself. But perhaps the most enduring legacy lies in the lessons the fight continues to teach. Students of history see it as a study in political symbolism. Athletes see it as a masterclass in strategy and psychological warfare. Leaders see it as an example of conviction under pressure, and ordinary people see it as a reminder that giants can fall and underdogs can rise. Above all, the rumble in the jungle revealed a truth that resonates across generations. Greatness is not given, it is earned through trials, sacrifice, and unshakable belief. Ali's victory in Zaire cemented his place not only in the annals of sports, but in the heart of humanity. He wasn't just the greatest because he could fight. He was the greatest because he stood for something, because he inspired millions, because he made people believe in what they could become. And as long as the world continues to search for heroes, Muhammad Ali's story, especially the one written under the humid African skies in 1974, will continue to echo. A legacy etched not in fading ink, but in eternity. As we look back on the rumble in the jungle, it becomes clear that this was more than a sporting event. It was a moment when history, culture, courage, and destiny collided under the African night sky. It was the kind of story that only reality can write, yet feels almost too cinematic to be believed. A fallen champion, an unbeatable titan, a divided world, a continent hungry for recognition, and a ring in Zaire where everything would change. What happened on October 30th, 1974 will forever stand as one of humanity's great reminders that a single moment, fueled by conviction, can redefine what the world believes is possible. Muhammad Ali walked into that ring not just as a challenger, but as a man carrying the weight of his ideals, his struggles, and the expectations of millions. And he emerged not only as the heavyweight champion of the world, but as a living testament to the power of faith, strategy, humility, and brilliance. He showed us that strength isn't always loud, power isn't always direct, and victory doesn't always come from force. Sometimes it comes from patience, intelligence, and heart. George Foreman, in his own journey, proved that defeat is not the end, it is often the beginning. His transformation from a feared destroyer into a beloved figure stands as one of the great examples of human growth. The fight humbled him. The world saw him fall. But he rose again in a different form, reminding us that loss can be the spark that shapes a better future. The people of Zaire, whose chants filled the night, remain part of this immortal story. Their energy, their pride, and their connection to Ali turned the fight into something larger, a celebration of identity, unity, and the global reach of sport. And so, as the lights fade and the echoes of Ali Bomai drift into memory, we are left with more than the result of a boxing match. We are left with a legacy, a message, a legend that continues to breathe. The rumble in the jungle stands today as a symbol of human potential, proof that the impossible can crumble, that giants can fall, and that spirit can triumph over strength. It reminds us that greatness is not measured only in victories, but in the stories we leave behind, the barriers we break, and the lives we inspire. Muhammad Ali once said, "Impossible is nothing." And in Zaire, he proved it. As long as people seek courage, resilience, and meaning, as long as the world continues to look for heroes who rise beyond circumstance, the story of this fight will remain alive. Not just in books, not just in documentaries, but in the hearts of all who believe that, with enough conviction, anyone can shake the world. This was the night when two men fought, and a legend became eternal.